Hello everyone! I'm back today to talk more about youth and mental health. This is the second video in a three-part series, so if you haven't watched part 1 yet, you can check it out here. I talked about social media and cyberbullying, relationships, adoption, and starting college. Today, I'll talk about 4 other worries that can affect young people especially: gun violence, gaming, climate change, and coping with a suicide in the community. The timestamps can be found in the description below, and don't be afraid to skip around. I know some of these topics can be triggering, so I encourage you to watch this video with someone you trust, or queue up an uplifting video for once you're done watching this. Do whatever you're comfortable with, and please take care. I'll be giving specific action items on how to seek help and find resources in the next and final video of this 3-part series, so stay tuned. P.S. While the issues we'll talk about today are especially relevant for young people, many of them will resonate with people of all ages. So regardless of whether or not you are a young person, we hope that you'll find this video helpful. Hello, welcome to this video. Oh, this is the intro. Let's start with one of the biggest worries today: gun violence. Since this is an issue that differs from country to country, a lot of my statistics and examples will be based in the US. But for all of you who have been affected by gun violence, I see you, I hear you. This is trauma no one should ever have to endure. And what a trauma it is. Statistically, America has more guns than people. And there's around 1 mass shooting a day. In recent years, more and more US schools have invested in increased security measures and active shooter drills as a result, although studies show that they may not be as effective as we would like to think. But while these measures take place in response to mass shootings, it's important to know that gun violence doesn't just take place in bursts. Gun violence can also be part of gang activity, homicides, and more, and it can disproportionately affect minority youths who live in segregated communities, particularly ones controlled by gangs. Now, gang violence varies so much between different communities that I'll avoid launching into a spiel on every neighborhood in the US here, but I recommend using local resources to get a better understanding of your own community's situation if you would like to learn more. Regardless of where you're from, though, you've probably heard some spiels about gun violence, whether that's in the context of a mass shooting or a street side showdown. For example, the claim that mental illness causes shootings, or that if we have better mental health care, all of this will just go away. These claims are dangerous, ignorant, and simply false. While we definitely do need better mental health care, the premise that mental illness is the problem is more often a scapegoat than reality. For starters, less than 5% of the 120,000 gun-related killings in the US from 2001 to 2010 were perpetrated by people with a mental illness. If we suddenly cured schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression overnight, violent crime in the US would only decrease by about 4%. In fact, people who have a severe mental illness are actually 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime compared to the general population. Every country has people with mental illness, but the US surpasses all other developed nations in deaths by firearms. The issue here isn't mental illness, but something else. So, looking at the statistics, it's just incorrect to assume mental illness causes gun violence. End of sentence. But it's not just incorrect, it's also dangerous. For one thing, it contributes to the stigma around mental illness. Some people worry that having a mental illness makes you a bad person. And if we contribute to that false belief, then the stigma can get worse and people might be more afraid to seek help. If we want better mental health care all around, the last thing we should do is add to existing stigma. Another thing is that linking mental illness to gun violence can feel really insensitive to people who have survived a mass shooting or who know people affected by one. Let's be clear. Mental health matters in this case, but not because mental illness causes mass shootings. Mass shootings are traumatic events, and consequences like PTSD, anxiety, or substance abuse can stick around with people for a long time. So instead of discussing mental health in the context of a mass shooter, we should spend more time empathizing with survivors and assisting with their healing. And that healing matters a lot. All this gun violence has made a lot of us terrified of things that should be normal and safe. In fact, with shootings from Sandy Hook Elementary to Stoneman Douglas High, many young people today are afraid of going to school. This fear isn't irrational. In 2019 alone, there were at least 24 school shootings that resulted in injury or death. And proposals to reduce school shootings can complicate things further. Most teachers believe that metal detectors and assault weapon bans can be effective, but way fewer feel the same way about arming teachers or school officials, even though those latter proposals are becoming increasingly popular in some districts and states. This can be extra concerning since calling in armed officials can be especially stressful for students who might be racially profiled. Now, I don't mean to bring you down. For what it's worth, school violence has actually decreased over the past 20 years. Still, the fear of a school shooting itself can make anxiety about violence worse, even if we don't personally experience it. And if we do experience that violence, well, the negative effects can hurt both our mental and physical health, from causing acute trauma and trauma-related disorders to worsening existing health issues. I know that sounds pretty grim. And honestly, given how much Congress continues to disagree on the right course of action, there will not be a magic fix, at least not in the US for a while. Still, some potential solutions like universal background checks, license requirements, and storage protocols have been shown to decrease rates of overall gun violence. So hopefully advocating for long-term solutions can help make mass shootings a thing of the past. But hey, no matter what happens, remember that it's not your job to shoulder the burden of gun violence, even though I know that that can feel so terrifying sometimes. We elect government officials for a reason. Don't carry this weight by yourself. Of course, no matter what I say, sometimes circumstances will feel scarily out of control, and in those cases, it can be helpful to use some coping strategies. So different things work for different people, but some examples include setting aside an hour or so each day to just tune out the news, or practicing mindfulness to address some of the stress you might be feeling. Reach out to your peers. They might be feeling the same way as you. And together you can discuss your thoughts while keeping each other's potentially negative spirals in check. At the end of the day, know that it's okay to seek help for these fears and stressors. What you're feeling is real and valid. So we know that mental illness and gun violence aren't actually linked the way that the media tends to say they are, but you might also have heard people blame gun violence on something else: video games. People have blamed video games for causing violence for about as long as games have been around. But that belief is just not true. Studies show that violent video games don't cause any actual acts of violence. The same goes for violent movies and other forms of entertainment. Still, the notion that gamers should seek mental health help isn't completely unfounded, in the sense that gamers are people like the rest of us, and anyone with a mental health concern should get help for it. But the jury is still out on the mental health effects of gaming itself. Some reports claim that video games can be addictive, and in 2018, the World Health Organization actually classified gaming disorder as a medical condition. Other research indicates that while gaming can be addictive for some people, most people who game don't experience long-term consequences. Other researchers believe that the negative consequences of gaming stem from technology in general, not just video games. All that is to say that there is not a consensus on how video games affect mental health, and it tends to vary from person to person. In fact, lots of people use gaming to relieve stress and create positive relationships with other gamers. Of course, no matter what we are doing, there are steps we can take to make it even better aligned with our mental well-being. For example, while multiplayer games are a great way to meet other people, do practice some caution. Whenever you interact with other gamers online, use common sense. Avoid revealing sensitive, personally identifiable information, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and leave the server if someone else is being too aggressive. They might try to call you a sore loser, but hey, your real life well-being matters more than your in-game HP. I promise. And there's nothing sore about taking care of yourself. So if you're interested in multiplayer games, try and find a group of players you're happy to play with. Joining a guild can be a great way to meet like-minded players. And you can also try to get your friend groups to try a new game together. Try joining a game with a large player base. Minecraft is a great example. A lot of players also play games like Minecraft because it's relaxing. And if you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety, playing these types of games can be super helpful. Relaxing game can be any game that doesn't stress you out. So for many of us, that means trying games that are not very competitive, like Animal Crossing. Another type of game people often enjoy is role-playing games that let you escape into another world for even just a little while. But sometimes you don't need to escape at all. Sometimes it's better to just fully immerse ourselves in this world and let exercising here do the chemical uplifting. For times like this, you could play a game that involves dancing or other forms of movement and fitness. Dance to BTS, play some sports on the Wii, whatever floats your boat. These are not permanent solutions for mental disorders, but they might help you manage some of the symptoms and get healthier overall. With all that said, gaming, like anything else, can hurt us more than help us if we give it the power. So moderation, as always, is key. If gaming starts to take precedence over school, work, or other personal relationships, that could be a sign to reevaluate your gaming habits. Try setting a timer for an hour or so, and once you hit that time limit, stop playing. The more you do this, the less you'll be tempted to play for hours on end. It's easier said than done, I know, but developing habits like these makes it easier to keep a balance between gaming and other things. It's also a good idea to finish any schoolwork you have first before busting out the video games. That way, you won't have assignments and other things hanging over you while you're playing. And of course, even moderation can lead you to encounter some of the not so great aspects of gaming. Rage quitting and the toxic gaming community are both very real things. But that doesn't mean gaming has to negatively affect you. Set limits for yourself and be mindful of how gaming is making you feel. Gaming can be a positive tool to manage your mental health as long as you're conscious about your habits. And remember, if someone or something doesn't make you feel good, you don't owe them anything. You don't need to stay in the game. The real you is so much more than an avatar. Now let's go from the virtual to the physical environment around us. Specifically, climate change. From devastating wildfires to powerful hurricanes and super typhoons, it's nearly impossible to ignore the effects of our changing climate. And not to be the bearer of bad news, but scientists say that these extreme weather phenomena will probably get more intense, dangerous, and deadly as climate change worsens. Part of all that is more pollution, which means we'll be exposed to more toxins in the air, and that can affect brain development, which unsurprisingly can impact the very biology of our mental health. But it's not just the biochemical impacts of climate change that is worrying so many of us around the world. This is a phenomenon that experts are increasingly calling climate grief or eco-anxiety. Climate grief isn't an official clinical diagnosis, but some doctors and psychologists say it can make people feel overwhelmed or depressed by the difficulty of finding solutions to climate change. And while climate change affects people of all ages, research indicates that young people are especially concerned about it. It is our future, after all. In a 2018 poll, 70% of people aged 18 to 34 said that they were worried about the effects of climate change. For millennials and Gen Z in particular, the emotional toll of all of this can add to existing mental health concerns. And climate change can weigh especially heavily for indigenous groups, where losing ties to your environment or relocating can cause historical traumas to resurface and put into question the important aspects of identity.
I'm from New Toluca, and when land is lost, when the effects of the climate crisis hit your home, you lose culture and you lose a part of yourself. And I think people don't really know how much that means to us.
I really wish I could be rosy or optimistic here, but there's no special advice for dealing with climate grief. At the very least, though, we can be aware of how climate change is affecting our health and how it is affecting the folks around us. We can show compassion to people facing environmental disasters, and we can give ourselves space to reflect. I know it can feel defeating when it seems like everything that is happening is out of your control, or like people just aren't listening. Know that what you're feeling is valid, but also that there are solutions out there. Millions of people are working to find them, and so can you. It starts with the things that we can control, like forgoing plastic bags, just starting a compost for your family, but it's also not your individual fault that all of this is happening. The biggest emitters in the world are companies, after all. So the blame isn't on you, and neither are you solely responsible for figuring out a solution. Still, it doesn't hurt for each and every one of us to make sure that we are doing our part to avert climate catastrophe, for the sake of the planet and for the sake of the future we want to live in. Okay, this next topic is also heavy. So if discussion of suicide is a sensitive topic for you, please be cautious while you watch this. If you need to take a minute and pause the video, or if you would rather skip over the section or come back later, that's completely fine. Do whatever you need to do so that you feel safe watching, and please take care. Let's start with some statistics. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in the US for people between the ages of 10 and 34, and similarly high rates exist for people around the world as well. As you can probably imagine, a large proportion of people in that age range are students who have close ties to their local campuses and communities. So in the aftermath of a suicide, it's these people in the same community as the person who died who are often hit the worst. So that brings us to the center of this topic, the cluster effect or contagion effect, aka the phenomenon of copycat suicides, where suicides occur one after the other. It's a very real effect, and it's especially likely to impact people under the age of 25. There's a lot of research out there to back up the finding that a single suicide can raise the likelihood for more people to take their own lives, though the why and how that happens differs. For example, mass clusters usually happen in an immediate period of time, and they are not constrained by geography in any way. Point clusters occur close together in time or space, and echo clusters are like point clusters, but they can occur over an extended period of time. You don't have to memorize all these differences. The point is that clusters don't have to happen all at the same school or all at the same time, and different people can bring about different types of clusters. For example, a mass cluster is most likely to happen when the first suicide was a celebrity or someone else who was sensationalized by the media. A point cluster is more likely to happen in a community where people have similar fears or concerns. Knowing a bit about the context of clusters can help us be aware of signs of one. But all that terminology can feel empty against the weight of a suicide. When we lose a friend or a loved one to suicide, that grief is often unlike anything else. The world seems to stop, then speed up way too fast, leaving you behind in this dust, wondering where things went wrong. And all these complicated feelings are valid. You deserve the time to process and heal. That being said, not all grief processes are the same. To make the journey safer, there are some things experts suggest you keep in mind. The first thing is postvention, which are practices that can prevent copycat suicides from taking place. A large part of this should be conducted by the school or the community impacted by the suicide, but there are some things we can do at an individual level. For us, it can look like remembering the person, but not disrupting or upending life for them. There is a difference between living life while grieving and only allowing your life to be grief. I know that sounds stupid. Why would you want to feel anything other than grief when you lose someone? But the truth is, grief is a life-sucking force of its own, and if we want to live on to carry the person's legacy and values forward, we have to give life a chance to be something more. Another thing we can do is talk in terms of hope and getting help. It's easy to feel guilty for experiencing any emotion other than pain after a suicide. It's easy to turn to sensationalism and emphasize the terrible details of a suicide when we talk about it. But it's important that we remain hopeful, always remind each other about pathways for help, and be generous in the ways that we support others. Not just for our own good, but for the good of those who may be teetering on the edge too. Suicide can make us feel useless. If that feeling overwhelms us, it might prohibit us from getting the help we or others need to not walk down the same path. So take advantage of professional help like talking to a counselor and use your own support system, be it friends, family, or other people you trust. Remember, there is nothing selfish about accepting time to heal. And as we heal, let's be cautious with our curiosity. One of the telltale signs of a suicide cluster is when suicides are completed using the same methods. Indeed, as human beings, we tend to ask why. And when we talk about suicide, we also tend to ask how. It's morbid, but it's human nature to want to know everything. It's like if we know how this person died, then we're part of the in crowd. But not all of us will respond to that information the same way. Some might use it as a manual of sorts for themselves. These days, news travels very quickly. So even if you personally share details with only a few people, as soon as others get their hands on what happened, the truth could get sensationalized, falsified, or even worse, become inspirational to vulnerable people in the most horrible way possible. So let's refrain from prying or sharing explicit details. That means being mindful of the news articles we read or the tweets that we retweet. Focus on sharing resources instead. Remember that help does exist. Talk about that. Someone took their own life. That's reason enough to care. The details, that's not our business to share. My final advice is a tricky one, but it's crucial. So bear with me. Don't memorialize the grief process. After a suicide, our first instinct is to remember the person as a hero or martyr, and we want to make sure that this person will never be forgotten. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do this. But in practice, grand gestures can romanticize or even sensationalize suicide. They could convince someone on the edge that if they followed through with their own tragedy, they could have their own movie-quality moment too, where enemies regret bullying or teachers mourn the loss of a brilliant mind. For a lot of people, it's this link between suicide and creating an idealized after that creates the final push, but this link is not true. But it can feel that way when we sensationalize grief. After a suicide happens, we have to continue living life. You don't have to pretend like everything is fine. You don't have to give up the ways to remember and honor the person you lost. You don't have to forget anything ever happened. You can still hold that person tightly. But instead of making grand gestures, try to channel their strengths into your approach to life. The past can shape us, but it can't define nor control us. So let it remind you of how precious life is, how painful loss is, but also how the people we love never truly leave us. It's hard to think of suicide as anything other than a tragedy, which it is, truly it is, but it's on us to make sure that one suicide doesn't become many. There are no magic words I can say to make things better or bring back the people we lost. But we can't give into despair. When we give into despair, we give up on the people we can help, the people we can save. The smallest things really can make a world of a difference. If you can take away one thing that I've said, let it be that. So not just for suicide, but for everything else I talked about throughout this video. Gun violence, gaming, climate change, and the cluster effect, although these have different levels of importance and concerns for different people, what matters is how they affect your mental health and well-being. They may seem scary to you or unmanageable or overwhelming, but take care of yourself. Trust in yourself, cultivate hope and gratitude, and share it with others if you can. When some things feel too big to deal with, it's all right that you only deal with the little stuff for now and take things slow. It's all right that you focus on keeping yourself okay. You're not being a burden by reaching out to close friends, peers, or professionals. You might even end up joining an advocacy or activism movement for the issues you care deeply about. You bring so much value to the world through your existence alone, so give yourself permission to do what you gotta do in these uncertain times. In the next video, we'll finish up this 3-part series on youth mental health with a focus on how to reach out to others and get help. For now, you can check out the description for resources on how to improve or maintain your mental well-being. And until next time, fight on.